I guess Jason has a recording already. He has it automatically recording. You're muted if you're talking.
So all the speakers have their panelist link, who is director of Atmosphere Energy Program and professor of Civil Environmental Engineering at Stanford University. He joined the faculty at Stanford in 1994. His career is focused on better understanding of pollution, global warming, and developing large-scale clean renewable energy. He's published 6 textbooks and 175 peer-reviewed journal articles, and why he has like much more to talk about, but why don't I let him speak? So, and if there's anything that you want to mention besides, mention that, but it's better if I just let you speak and have all your time. So thank you for coming, Dr. Jacobson. And so Dr. Jacobson will speak, and then after his discussion, we'll have questions, open questions.
Okay, thank you very much for your kind introduction. I'll just start the presentation. Can everybody see this? This is this screen. So yeah, I'm going to talk about how to transition countries and states and cities and towns entirely to clean renewable energy, namely to wind and water and solar power and storage for all energy purposes. And I've been interested in this for a long time, ever since I was actually a teenager. My grandparents were farmers in Sunnyvale. You might know of them. The C.J. Olson cherries was that's my grandfather, and they still have a fruit stand closed down a couple of years ago, but it was one of the last fruit stands and orchards in Sunnyvale. But I've had a long-standing interest in trying to understand air pollution and climate problems. Worldwide, 7 million people die from air pollution each year, and including about 78,000 in the US and about 13,000 in California. And these are avoidable deaths, and there are hundreds of millions more illnesses. And it's costing the world about $30 trillion per year in terms of statistical cost of life. Global warming is estimated to cost by 2050 up to $30 trillion per year as well. And already you can see a lot of the problems associated with it, including enhanced wildfires, more extreme droughts and floods, and severe weather, and more air pollution, and also losses of agriculture, heat stress, heat stroke, people dying from heat as well as from air pollution. And the third problem we're trying to solve is energy insecurity. There are 4 major types of energy insecurity. One is the fact that fossil fuels are limited resources. They will run out over time. That will cause energy price instability, economic instability, political and social instability. And second is the fact that you have all these centralized power plants. When one goes down, the whole grid goes down. So a more decentralized system with a lot of decentralized wind turbines, solar farms, etc., will reduce instability, that type of instability. The third type of instability is the fact that the international transfer of energy, having to import energy over long distances, increases the cost of energy. It increases the risk of supply disruption due to either war, international war, civil war, labor stoppages. There's an energy insecurity associated with that. And then the fourth type is just the fact that there's certain fossil fuels that cause health problems. Mining causes health problems of continuous mining of fossil fuels. And also, like for nuclear energy, storing waste for hundreds of thousands of years is a security risk, as well as weapons proliferation and meltdown risk of nuclear plants. Anyway, these are all drastic problems that require immediate solutions. So our idea is to electrify everything and provide the electricity with clean renewable energy. There are 4 major energy sectors: electricity, transportation, building, heating and cooling, and industry. And for example, for transportation, we would go to battery electric vehicles for most distance transportation, except long distance planes, ships, trucks, trains. We go to hydrogen fuel cell electric vehicles. where the hydrogen is produced from clean renewable electricity. So that's called green hydrogen. We do not support what's called gray hydrogen or blue hydrogen. Gray hydrogen is hydrogen from natural gas. Blue hydrogen is hydrogen from natural gas with carbon capture. We do not support that at all. We also don't support hydrogen use for stationary electricity storage for passenger vehicles and for home heating, for example. These are very inefficient uses of hydrogen compared with just using batteries, for example, and electricity, running heat pumps, for example, for buildings. For heating and cooling, we would use heat pumps for most individual home and building heating and cooling, and water heating, air and water heating, district heating and cooling to the extent we can, which is where you have more centralized heating and cooling units, and you distribute the hot and cold through hot and cold water pipes, geothermal heat, direct heat, and solar direct heat. And then for industry, we'd electrify that for high temperature industrial processes, use electric arc furnaces, induction furnaces, resistance furnaces, dielectric heaters, electron beam heaters. These are all existing technologies, and we provide the electricity in all cases with onshore and offshore wind, solar photovoltaics on rooftops and in power plants, concentrated solar power, CSP, geothermal electricity, in addition to geothermal heat, hydroelectric power, mostly existing, and then small amounts of tidal and wave. So about 95% of everything we need is already existing. We do not need a miracle technology. We just need to deploy existing technologies. And then for the remaining 5%, which are like long distance aircraft and ships, for example, we know how to do that. We just need to build them. So for storage, we also will need technologies, including for electricity storage, heat storage, cold storage, and hydrogen. For electricity storage, we would use concentrated solar power with storage, pumped hydro storage, existing hydroelectric dams, batteries, flywheels, compressed air storage, gravitational storage with solid masses. These are all existing storage technologies. For heating and cooling, we'd use water tank for hot and cold water, hot and cold storage, ice for cold storage, and underground borehole water pits and aquifers for mostly hot storage. And then building materials is another medium for storing heat mostly. And then hydrogen would be stored mostly for transportation and steel production, for example. Just some examples of existing district heating systems, and because most people are not familiar with district heating, actually Stanford, where I work, is now the first university in the world to be 100% renewable in terms of not only electricity, but also heating and cooling. And this actually happened a couple of weeks ago because Stanford, well, they built 5 megawatts of solar on rooftops, but they also purchased 2 solar farms. They built 2 solar farms totaling 140 megawatts. So they have a total of 140 5 megawatts of solar PV powering campus electricity and also the heating and cooling. So they, in 2016, up till then, 80% of the campus electricity and heat was provided by natural gas cogeneration. That was bulldozed and replaced with this 4th generation district heating system. This is actually the first 4th generation district heating system in the world. And 4th generation means that it has both heating and cooling. And so they built like 35 miles of hot water pipes and 40 miles of cold water pipes. Here you see 2 cold water tanks and 1 hot water tank. And electric heat pumps are used to raise the temperature of the heat for the hot water tank and to lower the temperature for a cold water tank. Also, when you create heat with a heat pump, well, you're not creating heat, actually, you're just moving heat from the air to the water, but when you move heat from air to the water, you then expel cold, and that can go into the cold water tank, and vice versa. When you're cooling down the chillers, you can take the expelled hot air and then move it into the hot water tank. So it becomes a very efficient system. Anyway, with this system and the pipes heating the buildings and cooling the buildings and all the photovoltaics powering electricity for this operation, plus for the regular campus, the university is now 100% renewable electricity. And not for all energy, because there's still some vehicles that are fossil fuel vehicles, and there are also a bunch of diesel generators, backup generators that are fossil fuel, but those will be eventually transitioned as well. This is another type of district heating system. This is borehole storage. And this is a community in Okotoks, Canada, 1 hour south of Calgary. In 2004 and 5, there were 52 homes built. And on the rooftops of the garages, solar collectors were placed like on the top left. And in those solar collectors is a glycol solution. During the long summer days, the solution is heated, and that hot solution is then piped to this building on the right, where the heat is transferred to water. The water is then piped under this field, which had been excavated, and a bunch of U-shaped pipes were placed down to 30 meters, where the hot water will go down, transfer the heat to the soil, and then when it comes up, it's cold, and it goes back to the building to get reheated again. And that heat gets stored in the soil for up to 6 months when the snow is on the ground in the winter, like on the bottom left, and the whole system is run in reverse. And that district heating system provides 100% of the wintertime heating for this community. And although the whole overall system, the efficiency is only about 58%, in other words, 58% of the sunlight captured in the summer is returned as heat in the winter, it costs less than $1 per kilowatt hour of storage, which is pretty trivial compared with, like, even though it's heat storage, compared with batteries that are about $100 to $150 per kilowatt hour of storage. So it's a very inexpensive way to store heat seasonally for several months. Here's another seasonal heat storage. This is called water pit storage. This is in Vogens, Denmark. Basically, a big swimming pool is filled with water, covered with insulation. These solar collectors in the summer heat up the pool up to 80 degrees Celsius. That heated water stays hot through winter. And during the winter, the whole system provides much of the heat for the 2,000 homes in this village. Here's a third type of district cooling system. This is district cooling. So in 1998, Stanford also had a big ice cube under a building such as this. And during the night, when electricity price is low, the electricity is used to produce ice. And during the day, instead of running electricity for air conditioning in the afternoon, when the electricity price is high and electricity is in short supply, water is run through coils in the ice and sent to the buildings to cool the building. So this is a form of battery storage because it avoids electricity use in the afternoon. But instead of batteries being $100 to $150 per kilowatt hour of electricity, this is about $30 per kilowatt hour. And this type of cold storage is used a lot in hospitals and stadiums for providing cooling. Next, I want to talk about transitioning individual buildings entirely to clean renewable energy. And this is pretty relevant to Sunnyvale. There are several towns and cities in the Bay Area that have outlawed and banned the use of natural gas in homes. And I want to assure you that that is a very positive step in terms of not only health, but also costs and energy savings. So I'm going to talk about actually my own home, which I built on the Stanford campus in 2017. And so I have now 5 years of use of this, but I have 4 years of data I can show you. The 5th year is not quite available yet. But the house has no gas on the property. It's powered by 13.6 kilowatts of rooftop solar. It's about a 3,000 square foot house, just to put in perspective. And there's 4 first generation Tesla wall mount batteries in the garage. And those costs, each one was about $3,000. So all of them together were on the order of about a fifth of the solar PV cost. But since then, costs have come down for both quite significantly. But I'll show you the overall cost of the system in a little bit. And so I have no gas on the property. So heating is provided for air heating and air conditioning are provided by ductless mini split electric heat pump air heaters and air conditioners. And so one unit does heating and cooling. And so there's an inside unit in each room, like on the left. And these are connected to there are 2 outside units. So for each outside unit, there are about 6 or 7 inside units. And they're each connected to the outside unit by a tube that contains a coolant. So it's no ducts, but just small tubes, flexible tubes that go between the 2. And heat pumps, they do not create heat or destroy it. They just move it around. So they extract, in this case, the heat from the outside air and transfer it inside when it's needed. Or conversely, they extract cold from the outside air and transfer it inside when it's needed, or in reverse, it really takes the inside heat and moves it outside. It's the same thing, but it uses 1/4 the energy as a natural gas heater to do the same thing. So it's really efficient. And as a result, the fuel costs are incredibly low. For water heating, I use a heat pump water heater. It does the same thing. It extracts the heat, in this case, from the room that it sits in, and transfers that heat to the water to make it very hot for showers and hot water. And it uses 1/4 the energy as a natural gas heater. For cooking, I use an electric induction cooktop, which is not an electric resistance. It's different from electric resistance. In this case, electric currents, well, you need an iron or stainless steel base in your pots and pans, and you can buy 15 of these pots and pans for like $200. So it's not a big deal. But the electric current induces an electric current in the pot. Well, first, when you have an electric current in the stove, that creates a magnetic field that induces an electric current in the base of the pot or pan. The iron or stainless steel are high resistance, so the current dissipates into heat. And so you heat the bottom of the pot or the pan. As a result, the stove is not very hot at all. It's just the pot or the pan gets hot. There is some transfer of heat back to the stove by conduction, but it makes the stove warm, but not very hot, even when you're boiling water. But it boils water in half the time as natural gas, and it cooks very evenly, and chefs like it. You can actually just get a single induction burner, like on the left, and plug it into your wall. That costs about $50. And I mention that because of the 7 million people who die from air pollution worldwide, about 40% are in developing countries. They're dying from indoor burning of biomass and coal for home heating and cooking. So you can imagine replacing burning fuels in your home with little ventilation with an induction cooktop, such as the one on the left. And that, of course, you need an electricity source, and many of these villages don't have electricity, but that's where building microgrids, where you have solar and batteries providing electricity for a village that's not connected to a grid, can come into play. But these induction cooktops can go a long way to reducing the loss of life and illness in many places in the world. So over the first 4 years of energy use for this home, I generated 120% of all my home and vehicle energy. There are 2 electric cars as well. So I had no electric bill, no gas bill, no gasoline bill, and also received $800 per year back on average from the community choice aggregation utility that I subscribe to, which is Silicon Valley Clean Energy, and for the extra electricity sent back to the grid. So I also avoided the gas hookup fee, which PG&E was going to charge me $6,000 for, and I show a range of $3,000 to $8,000 for typical homes. That's just to hook up your gas to your property, nothing else. I avoided the need for gas pipes. It was another $10,000, and then I avoided all these bills. And I show ranges for typical households. So there's a $5,000 to $23,000 upfront avoidance of costs, plus $3,000 to $10,000 per year avoidance. There's also additional cost savings, like reducing roofing materials when you put solar PV on your roof. Anyway, and there are also subsidies. And then with the additional electricity I sold, with the subsidies, it's about a 5-year payback time. Without subsidies, it would be about a 10-year payback time. And the solar is warranted for 25 years. So overall, it's really definitely for new construction homes. There's no reason whatsoever to put gas in your home. There's no purpose. Everything can run on electricity even more efficiently than on gas. You don't need twice as much infrastructure. You don't need pipes. You don't need a second hookup fee, and you're using much less fuel. Your fuel costs are just enormously less. So I would advise any community to prevent new buildings from having gas in them, because gas, not only do you have emissions associated with the burning of the gas, but there's all that upstream mining of the gas. There are 50,000 new oil and gas wells drilled in North America alone every year, and there are 1.3 million active ones and 3.2 million abandoned ones. And you'll need to keep 50,000 every year if we want to continue on gas. And the leakage rates of gas from mines, they're anywhere from 2 to 9.5%. In New Mexico, there was a study that came out just a few weeks ago based on satellite data showing about 9.4% leakage rates from natural gas coming from New Mexico. This is just part of when methane is the main component of natural gas and one of the leading causes of global warming. Just to illustrate how efficient this whole home is, this is the hottest day of the year in 2020 on September 6th. The outside temperature was 106 degrees. I kept the inside temperature at 77 degrees. And it's just the temperature in this home is just perfect all year. And the heat pumps are just running continuously. And I mean, most of the time they don't need to run because you're in the temperature range that you set, but they hardly use any energy. That even when they're running, when they're outside that range, they're just not using much energy. You can see that here. The green is the electricity production by solar. The blue during the day is the consumption of that solar by mostly heat pumps, but any other household loads. The blue at night is from the batteries. The red is grid electricity. But even on the hottest day of the year, I produced 14 kilowatt hours more than I consumed and sent the rest back to the grid. So you can imagine if everybody had a similar system, there would be no blackouts whatsoever on the grid. This is the type of day during which you get blackouts. All right, so then the next step is, can we transition the world entirely to clean renewable energy for all purposes? So we've developed roadmaps for 145 countries and all 50 US states, including California, and in fact, over 110 cities as well. And I just want to show you a summary of kind of these worldwide plans. When you aggregate all the end-use demand in these 145 countries, which represent about 99.7% of all end-use emissions worldwide, or all emissions worldwide, there are 13.1 trillion watts or terawatts of end-use power being consumed in 2018. That's expected to go to 20.4 terawatts in 2050. But if we electrify and provide the electricity with wind and water and solar, we go down about 56% to 8.9 terawatts. That's for 5 reasons. One is the efficiency of battery electric and hydrogen fuel cell vehicles over internal combustion engine vehicles. The second is the efficiency of electric high temperature processes versus combustion processes. Third is the efficiency of heat pumps. Each heat pump, as I mentioned, uses, like on the average, 1/4 the energy as a natural gas heater. But averaged over all energy sectors, there's about a 13.6% reduction of demand due to converting to heat pumps. About 11.3% of all energy worldwide is used to mine, transport, and refine fossil fuels and uranium. We eliminate all that energy. And we think we can squeeze about at least 6.6% end-use energy efficiency improvements and reduced energy use beyond what's expected in a business as usual case. So those all add up to 56%. This shows the same thing, but along a timeline from 2020 to 2050, where if we don't do anything, we go along the top line up to 20.4 terawatts in 2050. If we transition to electricity with wind, water, solar, we go down those 5 shades of colors, reducing the energy demand, getting to that 100% WWS line. And then we supply among all 145 countries that 8.9 terawatts with wind, water, solar technologies. And this timeline shows an 80% transition by 2030 and 100% by 2050. This will, if we do this transition, that would avoid 1.5 degrees global warming. But we actually want to do this even faster than this. So here's even a more aggressive timeline. It's 80% by 2030 and 100% by 2035. The endpoint in 2050 is exactly the same as in the previous slide in the same mix of generators. But here we speed up the last 20% to get it to transition by 2035. Now, we think we can transition most sectors today, except long distance ships and aircraft, for example. Those will probably take longer. That's why we even need till 2035 to fully transition. Now, here, well, forget Ohio. That's just another example. But look at the world. This is the mix when we average over all countries that we examined of the wind, water, solar technologies that we'd use. So onshore wind is 32%, offshore 13%, rooftop PV about 16%, utility PV about 30%, concentrated solar less than 3%, geothermal less than 1%, for electricity, hydro is about 5%, all of that exists already. Tidal and wave are very small, and then there's geothermal and solar heat. And in California, it's going to be mostly solar, utility solar, rooftop solar, but and there's a certain percent of onshore wind already there, but we'll add offshore wind as well. We have quite a bit of hydro and some geothermal electricity. So California is blessed with lots of very good resources. How much land will this take up to transition? Well, we don't need any new land for offshore wind or tidal or wave power. Rooftop PV does not take up new land. These plans do not propose any new hydro. The geothermal amount is pretty small. So it's mostly utility PV plus CSP for what we call footprint on the ground that will be taken up. And that's about 0.17% of the world land area. And for onshore wind, you have spacing between wind turbines, and that spacing can be used for multiple purposes, including putting photovoltaics on. And that's about 0.36%, the onshore wind spacing. So the total is about 0.53%. In the US, it's closer to about 0.8 or 0.9%. But in comparison, the fossil fuel industry takes up about 1.3% of US land area. And in California, it's about 1.2% of California land area. So in the US, we'll be using less land for transitioning all energy sectors to wind, water, solar than we are currently using for the fossil fuel industry. Can we keep the grid stable? So we did grid stability tests across the US, including in California, each of the grid regions of the US. RFC is one of the grid regions. And we did it for every country of the world as well. And we found we can keep the grid stable with just intermittent wind and solar, geothermal, hydroelectric, and storage with demand response. And this just shows an example for 2 straight years in the RFC region. And we actually looked at this every 30 seconds for 2 years. I'm not going to go into the details, but it's basically showing the supply of electricity versus the demand, plus changes in storage, plus losses, plus shedding. And these matched. Here they're showing every hour, but we actually did it every 30 seconds for 2 years. And what's the cost of keeping the grid stable worldwide? These costs, the capital costs in these cases, are what we call the Green New Deal costs. So for the world, it's about $62 trillion to transition. For the US, it's about $7 trillion. For China, about 13. To put that in perspective, the US spends about $700 billion per year on the military budget. So $7 trillion to transition the entire US is about 10 years of the military budget to eliminate entirely fossil fuels and uranium and bioenergy from the energy mix in transitioning to clean renewable energy. And this also shows the cost per unit energy in cents per kilowatt hour in each of these regions. But what's really relevant is the annual cost. And in a fossil fuel world, like today, we spend worldwide about $11 trillion per year on fossil fuels, or on all energy, not just fossil fuels. That's expected to go up to about close to $18 trillion per year by 2050. And then add on top of that the health costs of $33.6 trillion a year, the climate costs of $32 trillion per year. That's $83 trillion per year in what's called the social cost of energy. Compare that with electrifying everything and providing the energy with wind, water, solar. We eliminate health costs, we eliminate climate costs, and our energy costs go down 63% to 6.6 trillion a year. That's because we reduce the power demand by 56%, and then we reduce the cost per unit energy by another 10 to 13%. And so it's really the reduction of energy requirements that result in that huge drop in the energy costs alone. And then the social cost, of course, is even greater reduction, 92%. All right, and then, so the final part I want to talk about is the kind of policies and what's been done and what we need to do in the future. We first started developing energy plans in 2009. Our first plan was, it was actually this article in Scientific American on can we actually transition the world entirely to wind, water, and solar by 2030. And actually we were laughed at quite a bit for this study because it was so pie in the sky. And utilities didn't even think we could put more than 20% renewables on the grid without the grid going down. Well, that has changed a lot in 10 years. Not only are there laws that are in place throughout the the US and many states and in cities and in many countries of the world to go to 100% renewables. There are actually several countries that are at 100% renewables. But utilities have now changed the argument to, well, we can't put more than 80% renewables on the grid without the grid going unstable. Now, even that 80% is an arbitrary number, just designed to keep fossil fuels in the system. But we still maintain that we can do it with 100%, and we've shown that in many studies, and there are many other groups that have shown the same thing. It turned out in retrospect, this study turned out to be the scientific basis for the Green New Deal in the US, and which is a policy proposal to transition the US to entirely clean renewable energy by 2030. We did say that it's technically and economically possible to transition by 2030, but for social and political reasons, it's more practical by 2050, with most by 2030, although we think it's even possible now that we can do it by 2035 if we really put our mind to it. There are 61 countries committed to 100% renewable electricity now, but only one of these countries, Denmark, is committed to 100% renewable energy for all purposes. And most of these countries are pretty small, though some of them are relatively big, like Spain. But we really need, the biggest countries, China and the US and Russia, for example, and India. China, in fact, their emissions are equivalent to the summed emissions of 128 other countries. And so their emissions are so large. If China, it just overwhelms all the other emissions, even of these 61 countries. So without China on board, it's going to be a long way to solve these problems. There are 13 countries near or above 100% renewable electricity shown here. Most of these are powered primarily by hydropower. Iceland, Norway, Costa Rica, Paraguay, Uruguay, Tajikistan, Albania, Scotland, Kenya, Bhutan, Nepal, Ethiopia, and the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Scotland is powered mostly by wind, and Kenya mostly by geothermal, but otherwise are all hydro. And hydro can be used either for baseload energy or as like a battery. So it's really nice to have a lot of hydro in your country. That makes it just very easy to go to 100% renewables. And most countries have at least some hydro that helps. In the US, there are 18 states and territories that have laws or executive orders to go to 100% renewable for the electric power sector. And these include Rhode Island by 2030, Washington, D.C. by 2032, Connecticut and Oregon by 2040, Hawaii, California, New Mexico, Washington State, New York, Illinois by 2045, Puerto Rico, Nevada, Maine, Wisconsin, Virginia, New Jersey, North Carolina, and Nebraska by 2050. So that's progress, but it's not all 50 states plus territories. There are 180 cities and counties committed to 100% renewables in the US. And the ones in blue are large cities, and the ones in red are smaller. And it's really good to see like this happening not only at the state level, but also the city level, and in many communities. And then on top of that, there are over 340 companies worldwide, international companies that have committed to 100% renewables in their global operations, including 8 of the 10 biggest companies in the world, which are the ones in blue. And so they've actually been building lots of wind and solar farms and battery storage facilities and that's why the US is actually transitioning quite a bit. We're actually close to about 23% renewables in the US electric power sector. I should mention, when I say 23% of actual electricity production last year was renewable. In California, we actually reached about 97% electricity being renewable about a week ago on Sunday, maybe it was 2 weeks ago now, on Sunday. So we're regularly above 90% for a few minutes anyway, or actually above 90% for maybe an hour or so, but 80% for like 8 hours straight on some days, mostly on the weekends in the spring. So, but the idea is to do it all year, every hour of the day. So that'll take some more work. To summarize, well, we also looked at jobs. We found that transitioning the world would create 28 million more jobs than lost. In the US, it'd be about 4 million more. In California, about 300,000 more. But we require 0.17% of the land for footprint, 0.36% for spacing, avoid all these air pollution deaths, which slow and reverse global warming. We think we can keep the grid stable throughout the world. we reduce annual energy costs by about 63% and health plus climate plus energy costs by about 92% relative to fossil fuels. And finally, if you want more information on that, here's some links. And aside from that, I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. So I will, I guess open it up for questions. And I'll unshare my screen in a second, but it was, in case anybody wants to write this down, I'll leave it up for a second. So.
Okay, well, Dr. Jacobson, thank you for your talk, and now we'll open it up for questions. And I just wanted to welcome everyone who came late to the Sunnyvale Democratic Club. We're having Dr. Jacobson speak about renewable energy, and we're accepting questions. And wanted to just remind everyone that we want to keep our environment friendly, safe, supportive, harassment-free environment. So in any of your questions or your comments in the chat, just be respectful of everyone and focus on the issues and nothing personal. Okay, so why don't you raise your hand and I'll call on you. And so we have a first question is Mike Steroni.
Hi, but before I ask the question, I want to remind people who are attendees that if you accept the promotion to panelist, that we will bring you up, we'll be able to see you. We're doing this meeting a little bit different. So if you get an invitation that says, you know, you need to accept being promoted to a panelist, please accept that. Professor Jacobson, thanks for coming today. So I have two questions that are kind of related. One is, what do you see as the probability that we will meet the targets we need to meet for global warming? You know, in a political sense, given that just a couple of years ago, under Trump, our official company policy, right, was that this climate change is all a hoax. So, you know, what do you see as the likelihood we will meet that? You've certainly shown it's doable, but do we have the political will? And can you comment on a little more on nuclear as we all know why nuclear energy is bad, but now we're in a position where we may have to say, how bad is it compared to the impact of climate change that we expect to see? You know, can you compare the risks of the two, and are we going to have to accept undesirable solutions as well as desirable solutions? Thanks.
Yeah, well, actually, let me answer the second question first, and I'll go back to the first. Well, if to accept nuclear as a solution, you have to then accept you would have to believe that the other proposed solutions don't work, or they're more expensive. But it's really the opposite. Nuclear costs 5 to 13 times more actually per kilowatt hour of electricity generated than new wind or solar, and takes like 15 to 18 years longer to implement. So, for example, the average planning to operation time of the Vogtle plant, there's only one nuclear plant being built in the US, which is Vogtle in Georgia. You know, that's on year 17, and it costs $33 billion so far. And in comparison, per kilowatt hour, it's about $14 to $15 per kilowatt of nameplate capacity. It's about $14 to $15 per kilowatt. In comparison, new wind and solar is $1 per kilowatt. So it's 14 times more expensive than new wind, and new wind and solar go up in 1 to 3 years versus 17 years. I mean, they've laid enough cement for that nuclear plant in Georgia for a sidewalk from Miami to Seattle, and they haven't produced a single kilowatt hour of electricity. So we're talking about huge amounts of emissions for 17 years without any generation. And that's the least of its problems. That's the same in Europe. There's the plant in Finland just opened after 21 years of planning to operation. Flamanville in France is on about 18, 19. Hinkley in England is going to be similar. It's going to be 20 years between planning and operation. These things are albatrosses that are just not being developed very quickly and are also very expensive. Now, people say, let's use small modular reactors, but we used to do small modular reactors before the big reactors, and they were too expensive. That's why we went to big reactors. And so now you have these smaller potential reactors. They won't even be ready till at least 2030. So that's going to be after we need 80% of the solution. And so there's zero chance at all that new nuclear can help solve this problem. It's absolute no chance whatsoever, because it just takes so long. And these small modular reactors aren't even proposed to be ready till at least 8 more years. And even then, they have many of the same risks. In fact, they have more risk of weapons proliferation because they're modular and you can actually move them around the world and more easily. And some of them use more weapons grade uranium. So it's just a non-starter. We should focus on things that work and that we can deploy quickly. With regard to political will, that's a big issue. There's no certainty we will meet the goals. We can technically, but yeah, it comes down to willpower and information. It's not good to see, like, for example, this week, we're now, the federal government's now opening up new leasing for oil and gas on federal lands. So this is just a horrible policy, because first of all, it doesn't reduce gas prices one bit, because it takes about 18 months to develop a new oil from a new oil lease. So how is that helping at all? That instead, what we should be doing is promoting more electric vehicles to reduce the need for gasoline, and that reduces the demand for it, and that reduces the cost of gasoline itself. So I think we need to focus on policies that work and that are effective. And this is where it comes back to like natural gas in buildings. There should be no new natural gas in any new building. Even existing buildings, gas should be removed. Menlo Park actually has an ordinance to remove all natural gas appliances from existing homes. And whether that they've delayed the vote on that, so I don't know if it'll pass or not, but the idea to remove the reliance on gas is really an essential component of the solution here. But yeah, whether we actually get to the goal, it's a big question. Cost dropping alone helps a lot, but that's not enough. We do need policies to be put in place to speed up the transition.
Okay, that's great. So we have probably about 5 or 6 people that have raised their hand, and then Dr. Jacobson needs to go at 3. So what do you think if I ask the 5 people to say their questions in 30 seconds, and then Dr. Jacobson can answer all 5 of them in one big answer? What do you think?
Well,
or do you want to do it one by one?
Yeah, it's easier if I do one by one.
Okay, so I'll just start in order of people that raise their hand, and then we can also email Dr. Jacobson afterwards. Okay, Michael Albertson.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
I don't know how to enable my camera, but anyway, that's fine. So my question is related to Mike's question about the political will. So the reality that we have, and probably will have for at least several more years, that we'll have the divided Congress. And so these smart policies that in essence, the whole country would benefit from these policies, but we cannot enact them just by democratic votes alone. So it has to have at least some bipartisan support. I understand that it's outside maybe of your area of expertise, but what do you think about how to promote it to this level? Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Michael. Dr. Jacobson.
Well, during Trump, I mean, what happened was there was a big shift to the states and local levels, and all sorts of policies. This is why we have 18 states now that have laws or policies to go to 100% renewables, because nothing was happening at the federal level. So even if the federal government doesn't act, it's possible for states to act. And even those states that don't have policies, the 9 of the 10 states with the most wind installed as a percent of their electric power are all Republican states. And they don't have policies, 100% laws, it's because it's so cheap and economic. Like Iowa is the state with the most wind. It's close to 60 or 65% of its electricity is now from wind, and they have 0 policies to promote wind. There's the federal tax credit for everybody, but that hasn't changed in decades. So it's really that the federal government is not necessary, but it's definitely helpful for this transition, and will definitely help speed it up, but a lot can be done at the state levels.
Okay, next we have Sue Storoni. Sue, do you have a question? Can you say in 30 seconds?
Oh, there we go. All right. I'll try. Actually, I was having trouble thinking how to say this question. It's what do you say to people who are worried that reliance on 100% electricity will be unsafe or cause problems like power outages in their own home during a transition to 100% electricity? I don't really understand how the grids all fit together and provide 100% electric energy for everybody all the time. Can you help me with that?
Yeah, well, if you have renewable energy, a lot of it's what's called intermittent, like wind and solar. That would be like 90%. But hydroelectric, you can use to fill in gaps. And then you have electricity storage to fill in gaps. And geothermal is baseload electricity. It's flat supply. But it's really a lot of storage will help. And then transmission across long distances helps as well, because when the wind's not blowing in one place, it's blowing somewhere else. And then also places where it's very cold, having a lot of wind power helps, because when it's cold, it's also windy. So by combining these together, long distance transmission, storage, combining a bundle of intermittent renewables with hydro and geothermal, and even tidal power, which is baseload, it turns out you can match supply with demand. I mean, a big part of it is demand response. I mean, by shifting people's energy use to different times with financial incentives, that actually helps stabilize the grid too. And it turns out by combining those things I just mentioned, we've tested it everywhere in the world, and we can keep the grid stable everywhere in the world with just those techniques.
Okay, and then next we have Council Member Gustav Larsson. You have 30 seconds to ask your question.
You're on mute.
Still on mute, Councilmember Larsson. Should we come back to you? Okay, we'll do Gail Rubino for 30 seconds. What's your question?
Hi, Professor Jacobson. You didn't talk about agriculture much. Could you just summarize how that would work? Because I think there might be a lot of transference there. Thanks.
Yeah, well, so I talked about energy emissions, but there's also non-energy emissions from like agricultural waste, well, like methane from cows, and also nitrous oxide from fertilizers. So we would have to address non-energy emissions simultaneously. And we can capture a lot of methane with digesters, manure digesters, for example. We can reduce nitrous oxide emissions by using less nitrogen containing fertilizers, or crops that don't use nitrogen fertilizers, or alternative fertilizers. So we do have to address those with policy as well. They're a little more straightforward, actually. And also then in terms of energy from agriculture, we do address all the energy from agriculture in these plans. That's part of the sector. So it's that part, all the trucks and tractors, and any other type of energy use will eliminate the air pollution, the climate relevant emissions. But we do have to address non-energy emissions simultaneously.
Okay, and right now we need, Gustav, Councilmember Gustav Larsson can ask his questions. He's unmuted.
Thank you, appreciate it. So thank you, Professor Jacobson, for coming here. Really appreciate your presentation. I wanted to focus on storage, and you actually answered part of my question when you were answering Sue Storoni's question. But I'm also serving on the board of Silicon Valley Clean Energy, and we've also come to appreciate the importance of matching supply and demand in terms of time. And the role that storage plays in that. So I'm glad that you touched on that. And I was also glad to see that you had batteries in your own home together with the storage. So I was wondering, do you use those batteries like throughout the day, so that, or like on a daily basis, or are they only for backup when the power goes out?
Both. They cycle every single day. So in the morning, the first thing that happens is the sun will, the photovoltaics will provide electricity for the home, and then the extra goes to the batteries. And if there's anything extra after that, it goes to the grid. So the batteries fill up by 10 or 11 a.m. at the latest, and then they stay fill until the sun goes down. And as soon as the sun goes down, I start using the batteries right away until they're exhausted. And then if the grid goes down, then yeah, the batteries kick in on critical loads that they're attached to. So it works really well. I've never had a power outage in the home, even when the grid's down. And yeah, I just love the whole system. It's amazing.
And that's great to hear. I hope we can get more people to follow your example and put in their batteries with the storage so they can be self-sufficient throughout the whole day. Cool. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a definite advantage.
Okay, and our last question is from Hari Lamba. Can you ask your question in like 30 seconds? And you need to unmute yourself. Okay, great.
Okay, yeah. Mark, thank you so much. You've been a real inspiration. I'm Dr. Hari Lamba, and the author of a book called Brighter Climate Futures, Global Energy, Climate, and Ecosystem Transformation. I'd love to talk to you and cooperate with you. I have a couple of questions to you, Mark. One is, can we, rather than having annual political appropriations, which make it difficult to fund things, can you think of automatic taxes and fees that would fund this energy transition? Number one. And number two, what are your technical and other thoughts on carbon capture and storage and direct air capture? Those are the two questions.
Okay. Well, I think the best policies that can be put in place are not actually funding, but are these renewable portfolio standards, where you mandate a certain percent of, for example, electricity from renewables by certain dates, and you get up to 100%, but not only for the electric power sector, but also for vehicles, for industry, and for buildings. And then on top of that, then you do need, it helps to then have funding or incentives for people to transition more quickly. And I can't say that I can come up with the best funding mechanism, but it's, this will pay for itself. It's so cheap. It'll pay for itself over time. You do need capital, though, to actually catalyze it. And so that's really what the upfront money is for, is to catalyze it, and then it'll pay itself off. So I can't say what the best funding mechanism is, but I can say that I think the best policy mechanism is our renewable portfolio standards for each of the energy sectors. Right now, there's been a lot in the electric power sector, but not the other sectors. With regard to CCS, I think it's a complete smokescreen and unnecessary, because you can, taking carbon out of the air or out of an exhaust stream is exactly the same as not putting it in the air in the first place. And so if you spend the same amount of money on preventing carbon from getting in the air, like buying a wind turbine to replace a fossil plant, you're not only preventing carbon from getting in the air, but you're also preventing air pollution from getting in the air, and also you're eliminating mining of fossil fuels, and you're eliminating the energy infrastructure of fossil fuels. So you're really accomplishing four things at once, whereas carbon capture is not doing anything except for reducing carbon, and it's reducing less of it. And you need 25% more energy to run the carbon capture equipment. So you actually have 25% more air pollution, 25% more mining, 25% more infrastructure. And so it actually, and then you have to pay for that additional, not only energy, but the equipment, carbon capture equipment. It basically doubles the cost. Adding carbon capture to coal doubles the cost of coal. And who pays for that is people who have low income, because they pay the highest fraction of their income for electricity. And so this is exactly what happened in the one carbon capture plant with coal in the US and Texas, where it cost $1 billion, doubling the effective price of the coal electricity. And it was so uneconomical that it shut down after 3 years, and only about 10% of the carbon was actually captured. And they built a natural gas plant just to run the carbon capture equipment for the coal plant. So bottom line is, it's always better to invest in replacing fossil fuels than trying to take carbon out of the air. There's actually no case ever where it's good to invest in removing carbon from the air. Even after all the fossil fuels are gone, then it's a question of, should we reduce biomass burning? Should we reduce halogens, nitrous oxide, methane? It's a lot cheaper to do that than to try to take carbon out of the air, because carbon comes out of the air by itself over time as well.
Yeah. I was just saying, I had proposed 5 taxes and fees, a carbon tax, a financial transactions tax, and aviation tax of $10 per flight, a meat tax and a vehicles tax. And the idea is you tax fossil fuel vehicle activities and you use it to fund renewables. Anyways.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. All right. Thank you.
Thank you so much for everyone's questions. Thank you, Dr. Jacobson, Dr. Lemba. Did you want to just say like 1 minute of a closing statement, and then we'll let you go, and then we'll move on to the panelists.
Well, yeah, I just want to thank you all for attending and listening, and hopefully I was able to impart something new and maybe something that will help Sunnyvale transition, and also California and the US. So yeah, it just requires a concerted effort among lots and lots of people. So it really requires everybody working together towards the same goal. And that's the fastest way we'll transition. So to anything you guys can do to help, that's awesome. I really support what you're doing. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Jacobson. So now we're going to, thank you, bye-bye. So now we're gonna move on to Richard Mullinger, who's gonna moderate the next hour of our discussion with our panelists, which will focus on Ukraine.
Thank you, Linda. Yeah, okay. I appreciate it. Hello, folks. As you know, Richard Mullinger, president of the Sunnyvale Democratic Club. You know, probably the issue most dominating the news in the world right now is Russia's unprovoked invasion of Ukraine. And so we're dedicating the next hour of our meeting to a conversation with an excellent panel of Ukrainian activists who will be talking about the situation facing their country and how it relates to the broader world. Before we get into that, I would like to give a brief overview of events as they stand and how the sort of situation got here, because I'm going to guess a lot of our members are not necessarily experts in Ukrainian history. So Ukraine declared independence during the breakup of the Soviet Union in August of 1991. And after it did so, there were a number of Soviet nuclear weapons stationed in Ukraine, and Ukraine voluntarily gave up and returned those weapons in exchange for security guarantees in 1994, called the Budapest Memorandum. Since then, one of the major conflicts in Ukrainian politics has been whether to integrate more closely with Russia or with the European Union. In 2004, the pro-Russian candidate Viktor Yanukovych attempted to steal the presidential election. The pro-European candidate was actually poisoned by suspected Vladimir Putin's agents. Popular protest broke out called the Orange Revolution. The pro-European candidate Viktor Yushchenko became president after a revote ordered by the Supreme Court. But 5 years later, the pro-Russian candidate Viktor Yanukovych won the election. In 2013, following very heavy Russian pressure, Yanukovych backed out of a proposed free trade and economic agreement with the European Union that had overwhelming political support. Ukrainians took to the streets in what was known as the Euromaidan protests. And after 3 months of protests, Yanukovych's government cracked down, police opened fire, killing over 100 protesters. And after that, his support evaporated. He fled to Russia as protesters seized control and a new government was formed. As a result of these events, and it must have truly enraged Vladimir Putin, who saw Ukraine moving out of his orbit and more decisively towards the EU and NATO. Within days, Putin used disguised Russian forces to seize the control of Crimea, the peninsula in the south of Ukraine, and illegally annex it to Russia. At the same time, his forces in Donetsk and Luhansk, and I'm sorry, I'm probably mispronouncing that, in southeastern Ukraine launched a rebellion attempting to secede to form essentially false republics. The Ukrainian army enjoyed some initial successes in putting down that rebellion, and in response, the Russian army intervened directly, pushing back the Ukrainian forces. During this fighting, pro-Russian forces shot down a civilian airliner, killing nearly 300 people. From 2015 on, the conflict in Donetsk and Luhansk remained largely frozen with ongoing combat, but little change on the ground. Over 13,000 people were killed in that fighting, and this is before Putin's latest invasion. In 2019, Volodymyr Zelensky was elected on an anti-corruption platform and pledging to seek a negotiated peace with Russia, overwhelmingly defeating the incumbent Petro Poroshenko. Zelensky was a performer who had starred in the popular series Servant of the People about a school teacher who wins the presidency after a rant about political corruption goes viral. And for those of you who remember some of our domestic events, Donald Trump's first impeachment was due to his attempts to blackmail Zelensky, attempting to hold up military aid, including Javelin missiles, in exchange for demanding that Zelensky launch a bogus investigation of the Biden family. Ultimately, Putin proved uninterested in negotiation and began a buildup in forces in Russia and Ukraine, or in Russia and Belarus, excuse me, over 2021, attempting to create a crisis, claiming that Ukraine's long-term ambition to join NATO was an existential threat to Russia. The US began publicly reporting intelligence that Russia planned to invade Ukraine. There were numerous diplomatic efforts to attempt to convince the Russians not to do this, but they were uninterested in peace. And on February 24th, after a lengthy rant in which he declared that in essence, Ukraine was not a real country, Putin ordered a special military operation. Russian forces invaded along 5 main axes, northwest of Kyiv through Chernobyl, northeast of Kyiv through Sumy, Chernihiv in the north, up from Crimea in the south, and into the Donbass from the east. Most of the world expected the Ukrainians to fold quickly. But after an initial advance, the Russians ran into very serious difficulties. Ukrainian forces fought back smart and hard, taking advantage of their terrain, their knowledge of the terrain to inflict serious losses. President Zelensky remained in Kyiv, declaring, "I need ammunition, not a ride," when the US offered help to help evacuate him and his family. So since then, the Russian army has faced serious defeats, estimated at least 10,000 fatalities, more than the entire US death toll in Iraq and Afghanistan combined. Thousands of Russian vehicles and hundreds of tanks have been confirmed to be destroyed or captured. The Ukrainians have also conducted a number of spectacular strikes, including helicopter raids inside Russia and the sinking of 2 major Russian warships, one in the past week. Unfortunately, these victories have come at a terrible price. Millions of Ukrainians have fled their home. Russian forces have killed thousands of civilians. Hundreds of thousands more are living under Russian occupation. Nightmarish scenes of devastation have emerged from the formerly occupied territories around Kyiv and Chernihiv. The Ukrainians actually successfully pushed back the Russians out of the north of the country. And as they've re-entered these formerly occupied territories, the cities, they found utter devastation, not just from shelling and airstrikes, but from deliberate war crimes, torture, rape as a weapon of war, mass executions of civilians. And that is only in the areas that have been liberated. The city of Mariupol, 500,000 people, remains under siege and has been devastated. So Ukraine has fought back and held on, but Putin has not stopped. And so that is the situation we're in today. And with that, I'd like to, that's about as compressed an update as I can provide. And with that, I'd like to introduce our panelists. First, we have Igor Tregub, chair of the Alameda County Democratic Central Committee and the California Democratic Environmental Caucus. Next, we have Dr. Nataliia Goshylyk, Fulbright visiting professor at UC Berkeley, researching ecological identity and social media with a focus on sustainable development. She is also assistant professor of English philology at Pre-Carpathian National University in Ukraine. Next is Maksym Zubkov, a PhD student in mathematics at UC Berkeley and local activist and organizer. And last but not least, calling in from Ukraine, we have Maksym Protsenka, founder of the EcoConst construction company, currently volunteering on behalf of Chernihiv City Council to gather resources for rebuilding and relief. Welcome all, and thank you so much for taking the time. So before we get, Max Zubkov has actually prepared a video for us. I'm going to play that at the end so that we have as much time as possible to talk with our distinguished panelists here. So quick ground rules. Not every panelist should feel obligated to answer every question. Answer the ones that most speak to you. And if you're in the audience and have a question, go ahead and drop it in the chat. If we have time at the end, we'll do some audience questions. So let's get started. Can we start by talking about the state of Ukrainian democracy and civil society prior to the war? And this might be a good one to start off with, Nataliia.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you for the introduction and for the invitation. And thank you all the participants who are here right now, who are spending Saturday afternoon paying attention and talking and thinking about this very important issues for Ukrainians, but I'm sure for the whole world and for you as well. This question of Ukrainian democracy that I'll give you a very brief overview and a very brief example that you will, I hope you'll remember. Ukraine got independence only 30 years ago. So we have to remember that before that, it was in the Soviet Union, and we are talking about imperial policy and colonial policy of the empires who were ruling at those times. And the democratic process in Ukraine was slow but steady. A brief example that right now in Ivano-Frankivsk, the city I come from, the west of Ukraine, this city is about the size of Berkeley. So there are more than 150 non-profit organizations functioning. I started non-profit organization Center for Communication Research back in 2017. My husband started non-profit organization a year later because he wanted to expand the scope and work with the sustainable development in Ukraine, and he has organized 3 international conferences since then. So these are small examples, but concrete examples for you to understand. But I would say that 2014 is a very important year for Ukrainian democracy and for Ukrainian civic society, let me put this way, yeah? Because at this time, people actually understood that civic society and country and democracy are about responsibility. And I'm confident that in 2014, lots of people took responsibility in their hands, like literally, and they started doing lots of positive and good things. It was not only about the revolution of dignity and all the events. These were the events that happened after, because and here I want to very briefly to say about the difference between Ukrainians and Ukraine and Russia, Ukrainians and Russians. So Ukrainians are not afraid of taking responsibility, and they feel this need, they see this need, this urge to control the government, to communicate with the government effectively, to come to the council members and elected representatives, to talk to them, to ask questions, to take their time, and Ukrainians are doing this. And at the same time, Russians want to rely on everyone who was elected, and they don't want to interfere with the official affairs. So they are always telling that's none of our business, like the majority of them. So maybe that will be a very brief answer, and other colleagues will add to that.
Sure. So Max Protsenko, you are actually volunteering on behalf of the Chernihiv City Council. What has your experience been with that?
Thank you, Richard. Thank you for the invitation, and thank you all. So, first of all, I'd like to thank you all for your great support. Because of that incredible help from the United States and other countries and other democratic countries, at this very moment, I am absolutely sure that our victory is inevitable. And please don't stop it. My hometown, Chernihiv, had been an insurmountable outpost on the path of the invading aggressor for 1 month. All this time, the protectors of our city had been holding the defense firmly and inflicted crushing damage on the enemy. And after the enemy was defeated and retreated from our city, we were able to assess the losses received. Our mayor says 70% of the city infrastructure is destroyed. The power system, the water supply system, and bridges are disrupted. Most of the schools, hospitals, and administrative buildings are in ruins. The last time our city suffered such damage was during World War II. You might have observed such kind of actions in documentary movies or in history books, but now the history is being created here, and you may become a part of history as well, in a good way, of course. Chernihiv has several sister cities in Western Europe, and at the moment our friends from Germany have already wished to help us with the restoration of the city stadium. With the help of our other European partners, the mayor dreams of supplying the city's public transport system with electric buses. And I am totally convinced that his dreams will come true. In my opinion, the experience of American administrations in city buildings and infrastructure management is outstanding. And it would be extremely necessary in the process of reconstruction of our city. The city of Kharkiv, which also received significant damage, has already got the offer of assistance from the mayors of New York, Chicago, and Boston. Unfortunately, the city of Chernihiv has no sister city in the USA. If you know people who could help restore our city, American politicians, mayors, architects, experts in municipal government, or you are such a person, please reach me out in chat or email after the panel, and I will invite you to come here to Chernihiv. And you will see everything, and the democratic situation here as well. I will arrange a trip around Ukraine, meet you at the border and bring you to Chernihiv. I will get you acquainted with our mayor and other authorities so we could participate in the creation of a new city project and rebuild our hometown together. And we will take part in creating history together.
Thank you, Maksym. All right, so the next question I have for folks, and this is, I'd like to hear a bit from Maksym Zubkov on this, maybe. Putin has stated essentially that Ukrainians are not a distinct culture, but essentially misplaced Russians, and that he is invading to quote unquote protect Russian-speaking Ukrainians. Can folks talk about the Ukraine's historic relationship with Russia and with Russian culture?
So can I kind of also combine the previous question with
Sure.
the new one? Yeah. So I'm going to tell, I will try to talk to the point, just and give like just some bullet points. So basically, as a short background, I moved to the United States in 2013 on November 11th, right, 8 days before the revolution in Ukraine. So my memory about Ukraine was as Ukraine under Yanukovych. The first opportunity to come back to Ukraine was like in summer 2021. And then I also was in Ukraine this winter. I left Ukraine for the first time on November 11th and second time on February 11th in 2022. So, and for me, like when I left Ukraine second time, and there was like in 13 Russia invaded Ukraine. So basically what I'm saying, for those 8 years, I have been to the United States. And the first kind of my bullet point that I want to say, I saw a huge change in Ukrainian society, in Ukrainian business especially, because I was walking in the streets, talking to people. I saw how business was prosper. I saw how people became happier. So Ukraine was moving into the right direction, and Putin didn't like that. So I made that kind of the difference because I was in the United States, and I saw how I came to the United States without money, without like English knowledge. And within 8 years, I got into Berkeley. And I saw how business works here openly. And we know like Ukrainian comes from the Soviet Union, and we all know like Ukraine was moving in the right direction to get rid of corruption. So that's like one of the like important things that Putin didn't like. So here I'm going to answer the second question about connections. Right now, since we came from like Soviet Union and Ukraine became independent in 1991, Russia and Ukraine, we still have really close connections between our like families and friends. And can you imagine, like, as a Putin, as a dictator who is sitting like in Moscow, looking how Ukraine is going in the right direction, how Ukraine is prosper, and how Ukraine is a democracy. Ukraine trying to get rid of corruption. For him, Ukraine was the main threat for his like kind of rule. So this is like a kind of one of the main points that Putin invaded Ukraine because he was afraid to lose his power. Was going to, yeah, so that's probably, I don't want like to talk for too much, but basically my main point was that Ukraine was going into the right direction. That was straight to Putin because family members were talking to each other, and we were telling like how we can go and, for example, vote freely, how like our media can post any articles about any topic freely, and people like, yeah, really, and was a problem for Russian government, sorry, not for Russians. Yeah, I'm done.
All right. Who else wants to chime in on this question?
If I may just very briefly to add to what Maksym just said, when we are talking about the connections, we have to remember the words I have told before: imperialism and colonies. Yes, so we have to remember this. And within this framework, we have to look at the situation between Ukraine and Russia. But definitely, if you want to have to take a bit of a kind of a human perspective on that, you could use this metaphor of divorce, when people want to be separated. Yes, just imagine that Ukraine does not want to live in the same house as Russia is living. So they want to, because it has been bullied, it has been lots of bad things have been going on there, and Ukraine wants to leave and get divorced from Russia. The Ukrainian people have the right to live their own life and to make their own decisions about their own lives. I'm sure they do. For the last 300 years, Ukraine has been trying to get rid of this Russian influence. This process had its ups and downs. Yes, you can read excellent history articles on that from Timothy Snyder, for instance. Yes, he is writing, or from other Ukrainian writers. You could check this Harvard Ukrainian Institute webpage, where they have lists of Ukrainian books and books on the history of Ukraine, if you want to dive in closer and deeper into this topic. But for us, for Ukrainians, if we are to explain very briefly, so we've been in the same house for 300 years, but we don't want to do this anymore because that's a threat to our life, and that's definite. And everybody in the world right now sees this. And thank you for the very correct question here and the comment, this comment section, the chat about the genocide of Ukrainian people. Yes, people on the ground, Ukrainians, ask everyone and are using this correct word of the genocide. If we look at the definition of the genocide, definitely what things that are going on in Ukraine right now, I won't enumerate all of them because Richard did excellent job in describing very briefly what happened, and you all, I'm sure that you are following and reading articles, but only if we were to pick up only one word, we would say genocide of Ukrainian people, because they have their distinct culture, their distinct identity, and their will to live a different life. So we don't want to influence and to interfere into Russian part. So they have their own country, a huge country, and they might have used all the resources they are using right now on war. They might have used to help people live a better life and to build a better democracy in their country right now, but they are not doing this. So that's none of our business. We want to live our own life and in our own country, and to take responsibility, as everyone is taking responsibility, as Maksym from Chernihiv is volunteering with the city council. He is not an elected representative, but he is doing something to help. And my colleagues from universities in Ukraine, from nonprofits in Ukraine are doing the same things. So we are building, constructing, reconstructing our country. Thank you.
And thank you very much. And I'm just going to riff off of that really quick. It's important to understand that the definition of genocide is not actually centered on mass killing. We hear genocide and we think of the Rwandan genocide 100,000, close to 1 million people dead. We think of the Holocaust, 12 million people dead. However, genocide is actually defined as the attempt to systematically destroy a culture. It does not actually require mass killing of the sort that you saw in the Holocaust. The attempt to destroy a culture is what is genocide. And so things like, it's been reported that Ukrainian children in the occupied territories are being sent to Russia to be essential and then rapidly adopted by Russian families in an attempt. That is a hallmark of genocidal programs.
Richard, may I quote the Merriam-Webster dictionary here?
Absolutely.
Saying that genocide is the deliberate and systematic destruction of a racial, political, or cultural group.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So genocide is the word. Okay, so next up. So Vladimir Putin has made much of far right and quote Nazi unquote elements in Ukraine. Can you talk about the far right in Ukraine and what Putin actually means when he speaks of denazification? And maybe Igor could speak to this.
I can start, and I actually wanted to just also answer the last question.
Absolutely.
Okay, from my perspective. This is the closest to me living some kind of modern day rendition of the Civil War. If, reading about the Civil War in the history books, this reminds me a lot of what is going on. And I want to make the distinction a little bit between Putin and the dictates of the Russian government, atrocious, dictatorial, authoritarian leader that's a global bully in a petro state. But we have also seen massive amounts of attempted uprisings of the Russian people, incredibly brave acts, and folks that have been sentenced to 15 years in prison or worse. We have had dissidents who have been murdered for the act of defiance. So it's two different systems of government. The Ukrainian people have had a taste of democracy for 32 years. And once you get a taste like that, you don't go back. I was born in Kiev. My parents met in Kiev, but my dad was actually born in Belarus. Under the Soviet Union, there were these borders, but it was, as was pointed out before, a history of colonialization. And so what has happened, there are ethnic Ukrainians living in Russia. There are ethnic Russians living in Ukraine. Unfortunately, what has happened over the last 7 weeks is the Iron Curtain has slammed shut to a greater degree than ever thought possible, even in the midst of the Cold War. So all the reasons that my parents actually left, and then we were able to get asylum status for some of my close family members was because they wanted me to have a better future than what they experienced as Jews under the Soviet Union. What Putin is trying to do with his regime is to continue or go back to the quote unquote glory days of the former Soviet Union, or quote unquote make Russia great again. We've seen how that was, make America great again, how that turned out in America. Unfortunately, because the Russian people have never had the benefit of centuries of democratic norms, small d democratic norms, that freedom, independence, the ability to speak out. There have been immense acts of bravery, but unfortunately, massive amounts, and these include friends of my family that they can no longer call because either they know what is going on, but they're too scared to pick up the phone and talk about it because the Secret Service out there, the NKVD, is listening in, or there are other folks that are just, are subject to the same propaganda that the alt-right has tried here as well, that Putin has actually tried here in influencing US elections, but it's much easier for him to do it in a place where there is complete and utter control right now of the press. So with this denazification campaign, that is another basically weapon of misinformation and disinformation that Putin has been using. Zelensky is a Jewish president. There were Holocaust survivors that have been trying to restore remembrances of what happened so that never again would these atrocities happen again. And unfortunately, in the last 7 weeks, a number of them had been displaced, ironically, to Germany in some cases. And sadly, there was a 96-year-old survivor that perished in a missile strike on a city. There were also remembrances to the Holocaust. Some of the worst crimes of the Holocaust took place in Ukraine, and those were deliberately targeted and damaged during the illegal and immoral invasion on Ukraine. So again, Putin, I mean, we know this by now here, but it's going to be important for the rest of the world to wake up and actually start acting in a way that is commensurate, because Putin is going to use words in a way that weaponizes the people of Ukraine so that he can come out with a win. And so there is no moral or any justification for this illegal invasion, but in order to sell it to the people back home, he has been using words like denazification, and unfortunately, unless folks have had the benefit of knowing that it is misinformation, it is propaganda, and a number of the folks that spoke out are now either in prison or have moved out, it's going to be much harder to influence that on the ground.
Okay. You said something that I think is really interesting about the words and the use and misuse of words here. And so Nataliia is a linguist and a philologist. And so Nataliia, perhaps you could dive into what Putin actually means when he uses the word Nazi, because the way the Russians employ the word Nazi is not the way the word is used here, right?
Yes.
There's an alternative definition that they're really operating off of.
Okay, alternative definitions, alternative truths, we have heard this somewhere, right? Alternative facts, yes, that rings a bell. You're absolutely right. It's difficult to say what he actually means when he says things, because sometimes he means one thing and sometimes another. But I would be, I have to say that Putin has been very frank about his intentions and his idea of Ukraine and his attitude to Ukraine since 2007, since his famous Munich speech and the events afterwards. So he was not hiding what he is thinking and what his intentions are. And he has been very successfully manipulating the image of Nazi and the word Nazi in Russia. Why is that so? Because the victory in Second World War, the victory over Nazi, over Germany, is one of the hallmarks in Russia. And this military discourse has been intensified recently. And it's definitely that had a reason, because he wanted to emphasize the necessity of fighting for the country, for their country, for Russia. So he was successful in that. The Russian media have created this image of a strong Russian person, strong Russia, who will be able to fight and protect everyone who needs protection. And it turned out that Ukrainians need protection right now. About the word Nazi and Nazification, I do not have to make up something here, because recently, early April, there came up a very good article on RIA.ru. That's a state-owned media outlet. So I want to emphasize that if something comes out in Russia, so that has been approved by the state. So that's not a free like speech movement and so on. All the free movement speech outlets like Dozhd or other things, Medusa, they are not functioning right now anymore in Russia. So if we come back to this article, and it has been translated already, if you want, I can send you the link to the chat box. I will just quote some very accurate things that will show you what he means. So what he means, that was the article not written by Putin, by the way, but by one of the journalists, but definitely bear in mind that was the state journalist. So he's saying that denazification will inevitably be also a de-Ukrainization. Yes, so that means getting rid of everything that is Ukrainian in a country. So that again falls under this term genocide that we have analyzed previously. What else? The collective West itself is also the designer, source, and sponsor of the Ukrainian Nazism. I have to pay your attention to the fact that, unfortunately, this image of the collective West, of bad Americans, bad Europeans, like bad Americans and weak Europeans mostly, yeah, that has been very active and in Russia. So all Russians, if we just listen to what Russians are saying right now, because Radio Svoboda, that's Freedom Radio, they sometimes go in Russia and try to ask people questions, and some people are answering questions. So this image of like bad Americans and very weak Russians and like collective West responsibility is also very active. And another thing that is important here, that would be the last, maybe the quote about the name Ukraine. So the article is saying, and I quote here, the name Ukraine apparently cannot be retained as the title of any fully denazified state, in entity on a territory liberated from Nazi regime, and denazification of Ukraine is also its inevitable de-Europeanization. So say that denazification is getting rid of everything Ukrainian, everything that's connected with Europe, everything that's connected with West, and in their opinion, with democracy and all possible like developments and movements to this like democratic part and democratic world, because there is this iron curtain, unfortunately, it's there on this side. Yeah, so it has not fallen yet. So in their opinion, that's denazification. And if you go into the article in detail, they will also talk about killing people who are mostly who are very active in supporting Ukraine and in fighting for Ukraine. So I hope I have created and managed to, because that was very difficult, yes, to express and to share this whole, because the whole article, it was so difficult to read for me, because it was saying, every word in this article was saying, I want to kill Ukrainians, and I was reading that they want to kill me as a Ukrainian. Yeah, so that was very difficult to read this article.
Okay, and thank you for that, Nataliia. Yes, Maksym.
If you don't mind, I can add that Russians always blame their enemies in their own crimes. So it's a simple reason why they call us like Nazi. So that's it.
And many have remarked on the Russian habit of projection. We saw this in their intervention in Syria, where the justification for them using chemical weapons was they trumped up an incident where the rebels were supposedly using chemical weapons. And Russia bombs a hospital and says, oh, no, you bombed that hospital, right? Stop hitting yourself. So that is a distinct pattern in the behavior of the Russian media. And so I want to go on to something else. And this is for, let's start with you, Maksym Protsenko. Can you talk about why the Ukrainian resistance against the Russian invasion has been so successful and why the world has been caught so off guard by that success?
I'm not a military to answer this question, but I can tell you that this war didn't start on the February. It was started in 2014, and since 2014, our military forces has a great practice with American militaries and others. So that's why maybe was this reason why our army has this great success. Of course, very important was help of all democratic countries in the world. If we will be alone in this situation, so of course we will lose. But thanks to you, thanks to all of your support, all of that happened, I think.
May I add here, Richard, just to reinforce this idea why this is actually happening, and we didn't lose in 3 days or in a week. I think that first of all, that's because of the courage of courage of our military men. It's definitely, yes, courage of men who joined territorial defense. So they are protecting their cities, and they are there every day, every night, doing their jobs. Then the strength and courage and the networks of volunteers, and then the identity and the desire to help of all the Ukrainians who are all over the world. So Ukrainians all over the world were able and are still able to collect to create this image and to talk and to go to people, to approach, to talk to their colleagues, to their friends, and to share the concerns and the ideas about the needs of Ukraine. So this war, and victory in future definitely is a joint effort of every person who does something. So these are all the Ukrainians and people who are supporting Ukrainians and supporting Ukraine, even like you are here right now. Yes, you're spending 1 hour of your time listening to us, talking about Ukraine. That really matters for us. That's very important, because you definitely care. You have your questions. You may disagree with us in something. You may have your own opinions about the geopolitical issues, but we could discuss this freely. 3 months ago, we could discuss about the neutrality or the NATO and so on. These were the questions to be discussed, but right now that's not the issue. We are talking about other things. We are talking about the genocide and the need to stop Russia right now. That's why this collective effort and this Ukrainian identity that has revealed itself, and definitely all the people on the front line and we are at the back. Yes, we are trying to do our best, every day, small steps, taking small steps. Yeah.
So Maksym Zubkov, so you were in Ukraine just prior to the Russian invasion. Have you seen, what did you see in the run up? And again, are you sort of What is your take on the effectiveness of the Ukrainian resistance?
Yeah, so first of all, when I was in Ukraine, the environment that I got while I was there, that no one is expecting Russia actually to attack. Someone like mentioned that Russia did the same thing, gathering the troops next to the border 1 year prior to that. And I have a couple, I don't want to go into details, but if you don't remember, like in spring 2021, they kind of did the same thing. So we were like expecting Russia just gathering the troops to push like European Union and like United States to listen to Putin.
They were
for
bluffing.
me, it was a huge surprise. They were bluffing, yeah. So I personally thought that they were bluffing. So that's why when I came back to the United States and that happened, I don't know, like I don't want to describe what happened actually to me, but I wasn't in a good place. But I want to quote why, I want to express the answer to the question why we're like fighting so hard in one quote that I have the poster over there. And it says the following: if Russia stops, there will be no more war. If Ukraine stops, there will be no more Ukraine. That's it. There's no more like, I feel like answer is needed. If we're not going to fight, our culture and we as a nation are going like, and I don't want even to say slow, the war disappear. And also, can I just add a couple of comments to the previous about denazification?
Yes.
Yeah. So again, like I like to use other people's quotes, but again, like that is my personal opinion and my memory. So please go and check those quotes on your own. But Putin, prior to the invasion, said the following: Soviet Union is an old Russia. So that quote says how Putin perceives what is Russia. He doesn't even perceive Ukraine to be an independent country. About like about like, how is this word again, like called denazification?
Denazification.
Like, yeah, my point of view, this is amazing, okay, amazing propaganda, because imagine like you're going to create some sort of enemy in Ukraine and you're going to justify your invasion to go to fight that enemy. You're going to block all independent medias, you're going to block all social medias. And what is going to happen? Whenever Putin wants to fall back and declare the victory, he can do that. So right now, for the next like 2 or 3 weeks, it's going to be a really important battle for Donbass. And the thing that we need right now, and that some of the, let's say, European leaders like holding up, heavy weapons. And that thing will decide the fate of Ukraine. And based on the fate of Ukraine, we have the fate of the whole European continent and the whole world. We need to understand this. It's not like two countries that fighting with each other without nuclear weapon. Russia has a nuclear weapon. I'm going to end this quote here. And about kind of, I'm going to end this personal kind of story about why also Ukraine fights so hard. Whenever the Russian invaded Ukraine, my first desire was to buy tickets and fly to Ukraine back. But when I was thinking about this, I called some of my friends there who has, let's say, experience with in military, and they asked me a simple question. There was already like 2 or 3 days during the first days of wars. They asked me, Max, do you have any, let's say, military experience? I said no. Have you ever held a gun in your hands? I said no. Okay, they told me, Max, do not come back because we have a line of people who actually want to pay money to get into territorial defense, to get into army and fight. So right now, all Ukrainians are super motivated to kind of to defend our country. And I'm going to end here.
If I can just briefly.
Igor, yes, please.
One, I can relate to this feeling of complete and utter shock on the part of a lot of Ukrainians when, after spending months amassing tanks and heavy artillery on the border, a putsch was in effect attempted. And my parents had relatives that they were trying to encourage while the amassing was being done to go get a passport renewed in case they needed to flee. And their reaction was, well, it's gonna be fine. I'm busy right now. It took them 2 weeks to travel to Kiev to get their passport renewed. That same day was February 24th when the invasion started. The second thing I want to add, Ukraine's battle really is a battle for the entire world. This is our never again moment, unfortunately, once again. This is our 1939 situation, and we have a choice. Right now, the folks that are the incredibly courageous forces that are being pinned down in Mariupol and are down to their last bullet are fighting to preserve small d democratic norms, not just in our homeland, but throughout the world. We cannot afford to let Putin score any kind of victory, psychological or otherwise. In these trying times, I have often thought about the last words of Sophie Schultz, a fearless student activist who stood up to the Nazis, who was executed for the mere act of spreading pamphlets with real facts on the ground to fellow students. Her last words were these: how can we expect righteousness to prevail when there's hardly anyone willing to give themselves up individually to a righteous cause? But how many have to die on the battlefield in these days? How many young, promising lives? What does my death matter if by our acts thousands are warned and alerted? And that is what's happening now. Thousands, millions are fighting for our shared values, for our shared ways of life, for freedom, for democracy, for peace. And that's why, I've been working with Nataliia and Maksym to raise, at this point, we have exceeded $50,000 thanks to your generosity. If you want to contribute, I put some information in the chat of one way to do that. But what I wanted to say, when I was working with mutual aid societies on the ground that popped up in the immediate aftermath of the invasion, I asked them how important were defensive equipment and weapons for civilians as well as the military forces. And they said, for every $100 that can be spent on a vest or other defensive equipment now, that is $1,000 that doesn't have to be spent later to retrieve bodies. You can't put a price on a human life. You can't put a price on the value of democracy. And that's why these requests are so important.
And thank you very much for that, Igor. And actually, the city of Sunnyvale has actually, with the program that Governor Newsom has set up, is contributing surplus bulletproof vests and helmets from our police department. And so a number of states are working initiatives like that as well. So we've got about 5 minutes left. And so we're not getting into all of the questions that I'd hope we'd get into, but it's been an excellent panel. So I want to close with sort of one last question here. What does the rest of the world need to be doing for Ukraine in the near and the long term? And what can our members do for Ukraine? And so why don't we just go around and let's start with Maksym Zubkov.
Okay, so I will say what they say on UC Berkeley campus.
Max, hold on a second. I think that you need to cut your camera because your audio is getting garbled. So if you cut your camera, it usually comes through clearer.
Is it better right now?
Yes, thank you.
So I'm going to say what I'm trying to spread like this already for the last 50 days. Even if the war is going to end tomorrow, the base case scenario to Ukraine as a nation to be in the same economical state before the war is going to take at least 5 years. So what we can do, we should raise the awareness. We should have Marshall Plan with concrete steps, how to be radical transparent, spending the money, how to be like build the cities again. Half of the country got displaced. So what I will ask for you, for the audience, just raise the awareness, talk to people, and let them know with the base case scenario, we will need 5 years to restore our country. Thank you.
Igor.
Thank you. I cannot overstate how much funding continues to be needed. And I was on a panel with a lot of these same speakers 2 days ago, put on by the UN Association East Bay chapter. And there was a question that everyone went around and answered. What does $100 give? So $100 can give 1 month worth of food and supplies to a family of 4 in a typical Ukrainian community. $100 can give a small but still critical portion of medical supplies. It can give a small but sizable portion of defensive equipment that's so badly needed. So the first $50,000 we were able to raise in 7 weeks. The next $50,000, it's going to be so critical that we raise it as soon as possible. There are literally human lives depending on this funding right now. So I want to appreciate everyone who has given so generously. Please spread the word. There are many different ways that you can give. There are many different places to give. Whatever you do, please continue to give. Please spread the word. Slava Ukraini.
Thank you. Yeah. 2 years of this, I still haven't figured that out. Thank you, Igor. Nataliia.
Yes, thank you. The final remark is that definitely it's important to raise the awareness, but I urge you to reach out to your elected representatives and say that you actually support providing heavy weapons to Ukraine, because right now that seems to be I hate to say this, but actually this military scenario, this military resolution of the thing is something that we couldn't even imagine in the 21st century, but this is happening right now. So please call your representatives and or email or text them and say that you support this. This actually matters because this is a democracy, yes, and they listen to their people. And the next thing, sometimes I would have to be frank right now with you. Sometimes we as a group of Ukrainians, of volunteers, sometimes we run out of ideas of what to do, of how to approach people, of what to say, maybe some actions. And if right now any of you have any ideas about how to raise the awareness, maybe there is something that we are just not thinking of, but you think you have done this before in some other framework with other people, and you think that that would be relevant, please reach out to us. I'm sure we might do a follow-up email with our emails and so on. And please reach out and give us your advice, because I'm sure that you are experienced and you know, and maybe we could do this together and we could like benefit from, definitely will benefit from your advice. So thank you. That would be all.
Thank you very much. And last, certainly not least, Maksym Zubkov, if you can comment on this.
Well, as I told, I am totally sure that we will victory. But for saving human lives, I think the most important for now is to close the sky, because Russian bombs still kills people. So I think that it is the most important for now. I know that maybe it's not possible in a close term, but maybe maybe we will see this solution finally.
Thank you. And you mentioned that you had some information on how our members might be able to assist with the rebuilding in Ukraine.
Who maybe assist?
That our members, that like folks watching might be able to help out, you know.
Okay, if anyone can assist me, as I told, so or connect me with people who may assist to rebuilding. So please contact me. I will leave my email in chat, and then we will talk about details.
Wonderful. All right. Maksym, Igor, and Nataliia, it has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for coming and speaking to our club. The whole world stands with Ukraine right now. Our club stands with Ukraine. You are fighting, you are on the front lines for democracy. And so, you know, I'm going to talk with our board about, you know, whether we can send, you know, whether we can do something to reach out to our elected representatives on this. And I want to just once again thank you all for your time. And to close, we're going to try to play the video that Maksym Zubkov put together for us. And let's hope that this actually works. So
let's use the last link. Are you going to use the last link? I did some edits.
You did send me the updated one. I'm going to try and put that one on now. 1 second.
Okay.
Okay, so were people able to hear the sound when I put that on?
No.
No.
Okay.
Did you click this button?
Share
the sound?
Here we go. I think that's what I need to press. So I'm going to try this one more time. Hear it now.
Good afternoon, everyone. I want to tell you the story of how my hometown Chernihiv suffered from Russian occupation and how my family faced the war. For reference, Chernihiv is the northernmost city of Ukraine, bordering with Russia and Belarus. You can imagine the heroism of the defenders of Chernihiv. They took the whole blow and held back the passage of troops further to Kiev. On the morning of February 28, my parents were in a small village, Kiinka, which is near Chernihiv. And in the afternoon of this day, Kiinka was fired upon and bombed to smithereens. According to operational command, Russia used a package of cluster munitions, weapons prohibited by Geneva Convention. There have never been any military installations in the village, only peaceful people who hide in their homes. Some, unfortunately, could not escape. Thank God my family managed to hide in the basement. The windows in the house were completely shattered, leaving holes through the walls. Most of the houses in village Kiinka turned into ruins. Mom says that it's scary to imagine what would have happened if she had stayed in the kitchen for extra 10 minutes that day. In the following days, Russia enemy shelled the city itself many times. Its outskirts hit houses, schools, hospitals, cultural monuments, and even a line of people stood peacefully for bread. There is no forgiveness for this. Chernihiv has been without a tuned electric, water, and heat supply for a month and a half. Nearly all major infrastructure is damaged or completely destroyed. Logistics to the city is complicated because of destroyed communication routes. Everything rests on the city authorities and volunteers. The city needs help with the restoration of critical infrastructure and humanitarian aid. I believe that my hometown Chernihiv, a city of legends with a big heritage, including beautiful churches and cathedrals, some dating back to the 11th century, should recover and would be even more beautiful than before the war. But unfortunately, it is impossible to return its dead inhabitants.
Hi everyone, my name is Ola. I live in Ukraine, in the very center of Ukraine. This is my youngest daughter. Her name is Dominika. She is 10 months old today, actually. When the war started, she was 8 months old, and my heart breaks that she is the child of the war, like we call them in Ukraine. I have older daughter, her name is Amalia, she is 7. She understands more, and the first day she was too afraid to sleep. I was sitting near her bed, holding her hand and waiting for her to sleep because I couldn't sleep. The first day of war showed that the life is very fragile. We were very scared by the loud sounds at 5 a.m. The first explosions were near my village, 40 kilometers from my village. It was so loud we woke up, even 40 kilometers from our place. And the first death from the war was in that very town, 40 kilometers from my place. The war is the worst thing that can happen to our people. My uncle couldn't evacuate from one of the most destroyed towns in Kiev region, and one night he got guests. Russian soldiers came to see him. They asked, "You old man, are you afraid of us Russian soldiers?" He said, "No, I am not afraid of you. I am afraid of your guns."
The worst thing that happened to me is that my father was taken to war, and now every day I pray for his return.
Military Kharkiv ask you for help. People ask you for help. We will stand. We will win.
All right. Thank you, Max, for arranging that very powerful video. And with that, I want to say thank you all one more time and good luck. And the world stands with you.
Thank you so much.
And with that, I will hand things back to Linda to adjourn our meeting. Linda, are you there?
Linda wrote in the chat that she's muted.
Oh, boy. Okay, 1 second. You should be getting an ask to unmute now, Linda.
Okay, well, I want to thank all our guests here, and it doesn't end today. We will stay in contact with you, and my heart goes out to you, and our whole club's heart goes out to you.
Thank you very much, Linda. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you.
All right. With that, I believe we're at the end of our fully scheduled, our